Oregon grapefruit, and some of you will notice here that I have last night changed the genus name to Berberis because I was corrected. Um, so a brief word about this. Mahonia is the genus name that most people know Oregon grapefruit by, but as I have been corrected, in fact, the group that we have in North America, I'm not sure about all of them, all the natives. I haven't investigated far enough to see this, but they're actually classified as Berberis, not Mahonia. And notice that I also say that some Mahonia species, because what we have here is, for those of you who didn't see it, you probably saw it in the newsletter. I wrote an addendum to a short blog I had written on Oregon grape and other species in the genus Mahonia, and now actually I guess Berberis. Some of the species that I talk about in that are actually classified under Mahonia. That's some of the Chinese species, where the North American species, the one that we're talking about here, is actually classified as Berberis. Now, from a botanical point of view, that's somewhat important, but from a clinical point of view, to my knowledge, it has little or no importance. So this herb is bitter and cool to cold, and like golden seal and other species that Ben mentioned, like Coptis huanglian and Belladendron huangbai, this herb contains berberine, hence the name Berberis, although I'm not sure which came first, to be honest. So, like golden seal, it is the root bark particularly is quite yellow to orange colored, and that the darker that goes from a yellow to an orange, the higher concentrations of berberine, and so the stronger the medicine. And so this herb is used very much like golden seal and sort of covers most of the ground that Benjamin's just covered here. It goes to the liver, gallbladder, kidney, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. The thing that I want to differentiate here is that, unlike golden seal, this herb does not contain the alkaloid hydrastine, and so doesn't have the same kind of astringent toning action that golden seal is somewhat unique in. This herb is a clear heat and dry dampness herb, and it is used to clear heat and dry dampness from both the middle and lower burners. For stomach heat with bad breath, bleeding gums, nausea, etc. After when traveling, like as Ben mentioned, eating something maybe a little bit didn't quite agree with your gut. Berberis, Oregon grape is an excellent addition, or a very useful herb, something to keep around with you. And people have asked me if I combine it with golden seal, and to be honest, I don't really see the need. I'm going to use this. Instead of combining it with golden seal. I'm going to use this when I feel like I don't need the tissue toning action of golden seal. It's not quite as critical. And part of the reason for that is golden seal is expensive, and although now it's not quite such an issue because there's a lot more cultivation going on. In the past, there was a lot of issues with it being a a plant that was in danger in the wild, and it still is not endangered, but in danger. And that still is an issue, although I think the majority, I believe that now a good chunk of the golden seal is coming from harvested, or from cultivated sources rather than wildcrafted sources. So the reason I bring this up is because my habit has been more to go to the Oregon grapefruit and leave the golden seal for situations where I really want to make sure that I can tone the tissues. I think there's still a lot of golden seal that is wildcrafted. So Corey Pine says, yeah, I'm sure there is. I know that some companies, and I'll use Herb Farm as an example, that they get all their golden seal from cultivated sources. So I know that's something that Ed and Sarah have worked really hard to make sure that they're doing that. So anyway, I don't want to get too off the track there. So what I want to talk about here is because this herb does a lot of the same sorts of things that Ben just talked about with golden seal. The main difference is one of the things I just sort of delineated there. But what I want to talk about is, this herb has a very similar quality to the Chinese huangbai, which is philodendron. And it also, of course, there's species of berberis and mahonia that are used in Chinese medicine, although to a much lesser extent and more regionally. Those species grow in the south of China, interestingly, in the mountains, where our species tend to grow more in the north, although there are some in the south also. So one of the things that I have used our Oregon grape for pretty extensively is for yin vacuity heat, which isn't really mentioned here. So in fact, it's not really in the monograph, but I'm going to add it in here. So as far as these things that are written here, clears heat, dries damp from the middle burner, clears heat and dries dampness. Essentially, this herb does all those things that Ben just talked about with golden seal. So it's not as good for toning tissue and drying dampness, but still very good. Now, what I'm going to add to this is that we have a condition in Chinese medicine known as yin vacuity heat. So what does this mean, yin vacuity heat? Remember that the yin is the cool, moistening part of the body. And so when the yin becomes vacuous, there's not enough of it, then the yang aspect of the body begins to go awry. It begins to become excess or replete. And this happens when the kidney yin is vacuous primarily. It's not so much within other organ systems, although to a certain extent it can be. And so what happens when we have this pattern? What we have is we have a patient who is exhibiting many signs of vacuity, such as fatigue, dryness of tissues. The jianye is vacuous. So they might have a dry cough, a dry throat, dry mouth, dry tongue. However, they also have these, and also they may be tired. So they have these signs of vacuity, of yin vacuity, and at the same time they also have this heat. Now, we don't, in these situations, we may or may not, but for argument's sake, we'll say we do not. We don't seem to have any kind of active infection. So there's no pathogen that we can point to. There's not a viral infection or a bacterial infection. And yet we have this sort of chronic inflammatory process going on. And this chronic inflammatory process can view itself, and the most common symptoms that we talk about in yin vacuity are things like a sensation of heat at nighttime, or actual night sweating. And we call about the 5 hearts or 5 palm sweating, and what that means is the hands and feet, and also the chest, the middle part of the chest. And a person will sweat in those particular areas more than others. We might have a sensation of what we call tidal heat or tidal fever, which doesn't necessarily mean the person runs a fever, but in the afternoon and when kidney time is coming, then this sensation of heat, almost like a heat wave through the body. It doesn't usually last for very long. We have this sense of heat. We have lower back pain, which is more like an achy pain than a sharp pain, right? So we say achy muscle pain in the lower back. Perhaps there's some achy knees, fatigue, waking up tired in the morning. So this sort of combination of symptoms is leading us to this yin vacuity. And can anyone here tell me what the pulse would be in this? And I'm gonna keep talking, but I'm gonna look for someone to type in the pulse that is what we should see in this pattern. So yeah, rapid and floating is probably the best, although thin and wiry is possible. And the rate will depend on the amount of heat that we have. Excuse me, I still have a little bit of a head cold. So the amount of heat, more heat means more rapid pulse. But floating is important here, because the floating shows that the yin is unable to anchor the pulse, and so that's really important. The thin and wiry, thin more than wiry here, because the wiry not quite so much, although possible. The thin will show us the quality of the yin, the yin humors, which also we can include blood in that. So the more significant the vacuity, the damage to the yin humors, then the thinner the pulse will be. So in this situation, this herb is very good because it does clear heat and dry dampness, but it clears heat from the kidney, and it clears vacuity heat from the kidney. And so when using it in this way, I tend to use the whole roots rather than just the root bark. And in fact, the best way to use this herb for this particular syndrome is to prepare it with a saltwater solution. So the root is soaked in a saltwater solution. It absorbs that solution, and then it's heated in a wok, not boiled, but heated in a wok until it becomes dry, and then that becomes your prepared herb that's used for yin vacuity heat. And in this situation, I tend to use it in decoction only. I haven't tried to make a tincture from this preparation, but it's on my list of things to do. I tend to feel that in these situations, we want to use decoction.